En esta oportunidad tenemos la fortuna de contar con las invitadas del CEI. Bueno, se les voy a contar un poco lo que hemos estado haciendo en el observatorio. Hemos estado aprendiendo diferentes maneras de observar la investigación y de ver las líneas de observación de una manera diferente. La universidad ha propiciado también la realización de estos espacios mediante la disposición de las redes y de los sitios del micrositio que nos proporciona la universidad, en donde publicamos allá todos los contenidos de interés y el cual les voy a mostrar un poquito cómo funciona para que puedan ingresar a él y disfrutar de lo que estamos subiendo para ustedes allá. Bueno, este es el inicio del micrositio, en donde ustedes entran a partir de la página de la universidad. Aquí ustedes pueden encontrar nuestra sección de noticias, en donde acceden a novedades sobre los temas de tecnología, innovación, medio ambiente y diseño, que son los ejes principales en los que se enfoca el observatorio. Después de esto, podemos encontrar, bueno, acá ponen los contenidos, donde se ven los conversatorios que hemos tenido, las como novedades que les pueden interesar. Y bueno, más adelante encuentran como las publicaciones que ha tenido la editorial, y lo que buscan es generar escritos críticos que generen preguntas a las personas y a los lectores que acceden a ellos. Más adelante tenemos las guías estudiantiles, en donde están inmersas las reseñas y las publicaciones que escriben los estudiantes en materias del semillero y las materias de los cursos de las teorías de diseño industrial. Bueno, estas son las unidades. También encontramos contenidos de interés, en donde la idea de esto es subir información que puedan alimentar un poco las futuras investigaciones que estamos realizando en nuestros proyectos. Entonces acá es como insumos que pueden utilizar los estudiantes y las personas que ingresen a la página para hacer las investigaciones de sus proyectos. El centro de documentación, en donde aparecen todas las entrevistas que hemos realizado desde el semillero y el cubrimiento a todos los eventos que hemos realizado de todos los conversatorios. Entonces está allí para que ustedes lo visiten y puedan extraer toda la información valiosa que está ahí contenida. Bueno, tenemos nuestras caras visibles, que son enfocadas en las redes sociales, en donde todos tenemos más acceso y quizás podemos enterarnos más acerca de lo que pasa en el observatorio. Entonces, es Facebook, en la página del observatorio. Allí podemos ver contenidos que, si bien son productos del observatorio mismo, están creados para generar comunidad y establecer cierta conversación entre las personas que leen y entran a la página. Y bueno, está YouTube, en también vemos todo el contenido audiovisual de general del observatorio. Entonces, bueno, ya conociendo más, los dejamos con las invitadas y esperamos que disfruten el conversatorio.
This is loading, I can quickly introduce myself. It's very nice to be here today. I'm really grateful to Fredo and the other colleagues who made it possible and found this beautiful room and made a beautiful poster for us. So we're really excited and happy and honoured to be here today. My name is Fiona Lam. I'm a researcher at the Stockholm Environment Institute, based in Stockholm, Sweden. This is my first time in Colombia. I got here 2 days ago. I'm still very jet-lagged, so excuse me if anything seems strange, the things I say. We can blame it on the jet lag and not the research. But briefly, we're here in Colombia to do a case study where we will be working with some local partners to look at a water fund. and I'm sure you know more about water funds than me, but a mechanism whereby people living upstream in a river basin who are using water for their livelihoods, often farmers or ranchers, are paid money by people living downstream to take better care of the water resources by maybe changing their behavior, or in more extreme cases, and what's quite common, has been to pay people to leave their land altogether in order to protect the quality for people living downstream, often people living in cities. So that's going to be the main focus of the, hopefully, discussion that we can have later today, to get your thoughts and insights on how we can go there and learn more about how to better design these types of funds. But a little word about my institute, Stockholm Environment Institute. We are something between a policy and research institute. So our mission statement is to bridge the gap between science and policy. So we're not just doing science for the sake of science. We always want to have some sort of impact in mind with all the work that we do. We get our funding 40% more or less from the Swedish government, from the overseas aid budget, and 60% from diverse different projects that people apply for themselves. We have 8 centres globally, so our name is quite misleading, the Stockholm Environment Institute. We're not just Swedish, we're a global institute. And our most recent centre to open is the one here in Bogota. So in December 2017, our office here opened, and we have about 10 staff working here. In total, we have about 230 globally. Depending on what year it is, we're either the first or the second most influential think tank. It goes up and down. Right now, we're number 2, so sorry. At SEI, I'm part of something called the Behavior and Choice Initiative. So you could see this like a research program within SEI. It's funded by the Swedish government. And the purpose of the Behavior and Choice Initiative is to understand what is driving or influencing behavior of people at the very local level, and what impact does that have on the success or failure of interventions or technologies that are supposed to help these people living at the local level. So today, the key messages I was going to talk about is why we need design in development, essentially, how this can be done, and what we will be doing on this trip in Colombia as part of this bigger project. And then on the Behavior and Choice Initiative, another quick slide here, just to understand the core objective, as I said before, identify the key factors that influence behavior in people when it comes to adopting technologies or changing behaviors. And then why do we do this? We always have a policy objective, not just a research objective. The policy objective is to increase the effectiveness of interventions that are supposed to make a difference at the local level. And the main thing we've been trying to do is develop new tools and new approaches to better understand people in their local contexts. Because we have this feeling or this insight that the methods currently being used aren't good enough for understanding people in their contexts. And then all of this is supposed to lead to improved livelihoods, local benefits for people and the environment, and more effective use of public money that's used to fund these interventions. On this slide, I think I've used this in a lot of presentations about why we started the Behavior and Choice Initiative. A lot of my work at SEI when I first joined had to do with cook stoves in African countries. So trying to find better, more efficient ways for people to use firewood to cook their food. Cook stoves that are less smoky and are better for their health and better for the environment, using less trees and so on. But in my work in these different projects, I noticed often that when I would arrive somewhere to visit a cook stove project, the technology there always seemed really like out of place, out of context somehow. And we would interview these households and they would say, yeah, it's really nice, I really like it, it's really pretty and shiny. And then after digging a little bit and actually hanging around a little bit and asking more questions and observing how people were really interacting with the technology, we noticed, wait a second, like nobody's really cooking on these cook stoves. We haven't really seen anything. And then maybe somebody would do a demonstration where they would try to make tea, and sometimes it worked and sometimes not. But our gut feeling was that these maybe aren't the most appropriate technologies. And maybe the people who designed these technologies and interventions could have interacted a bit more with the households and communities before they piloted and rolled out the projects. And this is something that we found wasn't just in the cook stove world, that talking to colleagues at SCI who are working on working on sanitation projects, working on projects to introduce technologies to farmers, they would go back a year later after seeing a project start, and the thing is either sitting on a shelf or it's been sold. It's basically not being used. So we have this question growing across many different types of technologies and types of interventions. Why? Why is that? What happens inside people's homes, inside people's communities, inside people's minds? What happens when these things come in? And then I was on another research visit in Haryana in northern India. And again, we were asking all these questions about a cook stove project that was happening. And everyone's saying, yeah, I like the stove. It's really nice. I'm like, yeah, you cook on it every day? Yeah, I cook everything on the stove. Okay, so where is the stove? Can I see it? And the same thing, people had trouble finding the stove because it was sitting on a shelf somewhere. So I had a big piece of white, like sticky white paper, and I covered a cardboard box with the paper and asked some women to come and sit with me, and I had these whiteboard pens, and I just told them, like, can you like draw your dream stove? Or actually, no, I think I said to them, this is the most amazing stove in the world. This is the dream stove that everybody in the world wants to have. Everyone wants to have it, especially people living here in India and especially people living in Haryana. What does it look like? And they didn't know what to say. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I can start. I think it looks like this. I think it has 2 rings here because people here cook a lot. And I think you need 2 rings to be able to cook. And then the oldest lady in the group, the lady you hear sitting pointing, she said, no, that's not right. That's not right. And she took the pen and she herself started to draw. It should look like this. It should have 1 ring and it should have things on the side where you can rest pots when they're not fully in use. And then another woman said, no, that doesn't make any sense. You're too old. You don't know what you're talking about. And before long, the women were sitting around together, sketching and drawing and prototyping and wiping out and redrawing the design of the cook stove. And I had this professor from a university in New Delhi with me, scratching his head like, Fiona, what are you doing? Like, what kind of information are we going to get from this? We don't know anything about the quantitative things. We don't know about how much they're willing to pay for a stove like this or how efficient it is. It's pointless to ask these questions about a stove that doesn't even exist. But I was thinking, no, you're wrong, actually. This is the whole point. We have to understand. We have to be able to imagine things that don't exist. So in general, to sort of position our thinking as researchers engaging with design, and what does this mean for development more generally, moving away from cook stoves and zooming out a bit. It seems to me and my colleagues and a lot of people that now more than ever, we need to rethink how interventions are designed and rolled out. And this is being recognized at the highest levels. So recently, a couple of weeks ago, the Vice President of the World Bank himself was saying that business as usual, it's not enough. It's not enough to deliver on Agenda 2030, on the Sustainable Development Goals. We have world-renowned economists who are now writing books like The Third Pillar, how markets and the state leave the community behind. There's a push for inclusive localism, how to get people back into the picture again after years of leaving them out of the picture. So we've been very inspired by all of this, and in particular by some work done by behavioral economists who are super quantitative guys, but they've embraced design and design thinking and combined it with behavioral science in a really interesting new way. So we start to think, these companies, global, huge companies, are investing in design thinking and service design because it makes money for them.
It makes their products better, it makes their services better, it makes people love their brand and love their company. And in the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen design thinking and service design being rolled out in European countries to design public services that are really working for citizens. They engage citizens from the very beginning. So we start to think, like, why don't we do this with development interventions? Why is this not the way that everything is designed? So, are people in the room familiar with service design? Yes, then I don't need to talk too much about that. But for us, service design has been extremely useful for mapping out people's decision-making landscape. And that means everything around them that could influence their decision. It's extremely wide, this sort of context understanding. But also, it seeks to engage with actors working at different levels. So of course we need to understand households, cook stove users, farmers. We need to understand their behavior and needs and how they think. But if anything is going to scale up and really work and really take off, we need to have all the other actors at other levels of the system. The NGOs, the community level actors, governments, technical people in ministries, the people who are up there setting the agenda. Is there a way to get all of these levels engaging together? And is there a way of getting the local level into the deciding process at an earlier stage? We think if you could do that, you would have solutions that are basically more sustainable in the long run. For us, this is the business as usual way of designing development. So at the first 3 stages, setting the agenda, what is it we're trying to do? Defining the problem, what is it we're trying to address? And finding the solution. Those 3 crucial stages don't really bring in micro-level actors. In other words, people at the community level. They're completely shut out of those stages. Only at the very end of solution identification and implementation, only then do you see the middle level, the meso level people, the NGOs and the people working to implement the solutions, and the micro level people coming in. And this is not a good situation. You're likely to have interventions with unforeseen consequences that are not adopted and embraced by people at the local level. If you were to take a service design approach and completely rethink the business as usual model, we think it could look something like this. You have agenda setting, so you have the guys at the maybe global level, the UN Secretary General, people sitting far away in nice offices, setting the agenda, hopefully engaging with national level decision makers. But after that, from then on, you have micro, meso, and macro coming in together. You have a space for the micro level, for the local people. Solution identification, absolutely. Households and communities need to be in there. They need to be driving that. And then program implementation is overwhelmingly the people, the communities working together with the meso level NGOs and other actors, with minimal input, ideally, from the macro level, from the governments don't want to be following up on monitoring and evaluating and following things like that. It's not an efficient way of working. So we think this would be a more sensible and sustainable way of doing things. But as you know, as designers, the process of design is kind of messy. It should be like that. There's like backwards and forwards. But we really sort of embrace that. This is the model that should be followed. Even if it's looking a bit messy, there is a direction that's being followed. And it's going up and down from macro to meso to micro all the time. Where we've tried to do this in lots of different case studies, mostly in East Africa, we've been doing these loops of understanding with the local community, where we go in and do a lot of deep interviews and focus groups, try to make sense of what we're seeing, of these patterns, and then go out, share it with people outside of the community. What do you think? Does this make sense? If not, why not? Okay. And then we go back again. So it's this in and out analysis that can take a very long time and can be quite frustrating. But using ideation, throwing in ideas and trigger material to try to get people to tell us what they really think, not what they think we want to hear, until finally you get something hopefully closer to a a solution that's likely to work in the real world. Just to give an idea of what comes out of that process for us that's been very useful is something, I'm sure you're familiar with user journey mapping, but doing a sort of user journey of an experience of getting a new technology or changing a practice, understanding from the household's perspective, where are the pain points and where are the gain points, where are the opportunities for making the system work better for them. And by doing this and involving actors at different levels, you start to see who has the capability, capacity, and resources to come in and solve some of these problems at these different levels. We did a case study in Uganda where we were not looking at technology. It was a very complex sort of problem that we weren't familiar with, but in Uganda they're getting a lot of climate shocks because of lack of rainfall, because of climate change basically. They're getting droughts and then they're getting too much rain. Sometimes they're getting small worms attacking their crops. It's impossible to plan. There's a lot of risk and people are already at a very low level of resilience and income. Could insurance help? This seems like an obvious thing. Why not insure these farmers? But it's been very difficult to insure small-scale farmers. It's not profitable for large companies to go out and verify claims of small-scale farmers. So then there was an idea to look at weather index insurance. If you can use satellite technology that can show exactly which farms did and did not get rainfall, then you could automatically verify claims and do automatic payouts to the households. So the insurance company, they wanted to know, this is a great idea, why isn't it being used and rolled out? Why is it so difficult to get this going? Why can't we get farmers to sign up to these? We don't really know what they want. So we were invited to go there and use our toolkit, starting off with the service design part, trying to understand users in context, trying to understand who these farmers are. When we were told about the project first, the information we got was that they're all the same. They're poor farmers. You have rich farmers, they live over here. You have poor farmers, they live in these communities. This is where you will do your interviews. And we went there and yeah, okay, they were not very well off, but they were not all the same. I've never been in a community where everyone is all the same. They're very different types of households that could be defined and classified in much more useful ways than level of income. Some of them didn't have much money, but they were really strong. They were really well networked in the community. They knew a lot of powerful people. And then we had some people that had a lot of assets, a lot of money, but they didn't really know anyone, and they were socially isolated. All of these different categories of farmers needed different things to reduce the risk to climate change. And what we were able to do with that information was, it's very messy, how do you make sense of it? We were able to identify some archetypes, types of farmers, and for those archetypes we were able to design some prototypes of insurance packages. So these guys might be interested in this kind of package based on what we've learned. You can tell that we're not naturally gifted at drawing. We presented these archetypes in a workshop to the farmers and to other community members, and we described them in a narrative way, so not in a very sort of, we tried to make them come to life basically. So this is Charles. Charles is 38 years old and this is his story. This is how he came to this place. These are his assets, blah, 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 blah. The first thing we wanted to see is like, does this make sense? Does anyone know a Charles? Is this a strong archetype? And people really seem to see that Charles, there are a lot of people like Charles in the community. So this seemed to be on the right track. And then we had them play some games where they imagined what Charles would do if there was a sudden climate shock. What would he do? What's the first thing Charles would do? Would he sell his animals? Would he move away? Would he try to get another job? And so on. And then we tried to test these different prototype insurance packages. Who would buy what and why? Okay, enough about Africa. But I want to give you a sense of the kinds of things we've done in other places. So we're in Colombia, Karin and I, and some other colleagues for the first time, what are these foreigners doing in Colombia? We were asked to come here by a partner who's working on introducing a water fund in Caldas, in the Chinchina River Basin, not too far from Manizales. And the idea with the water fund, as I said earlier, is that people in the cities pay the users of the water upstream to take better care of the water so that they get better quality water downstream. And this is important because cities are growing, right? So the demand for water is increasing. But it's difficult to design these in a way that is sustainable and socially equitable. As I said before, paying people to just leave their land will have long-term consequences, I think, a lot of people think, for the people who were paid to leave the land. Where do they go after that, and what happens then? So the partner that we're working with, they want to pay people, but have them stay on the land, but work with them to try to change the way that they're using the water and some of their practices that might not be so sustainable. But behavior change is really difficult and complex. And especially if you want to do it in a way that takes note of social equity, you want to make sure that nobody is left out of this potential fund. So there's a lot of questions. What should the water fund look like? What kind of benefits should it give? Are there ways to design a water fund that can support and trigger behavior change that can continue into the future? Lots of questions. We will go there this weekend. We will leave on Sunday and have a week, only 1 week, imagine, to do as many interviews as we can physically manage in a week with small farmers. We're interested in speaking to farmers who may be a bit more vulnerable, and because we're looking at this with a social equity lens, we want to make sure that we're capturing the ones that are a bit further away and harder to get to. So we will do interviews with them during the week, and I don't know what we're going to find, actually. Maybe it will be like Uganda, where we start to see there are clear archetypes of people here. There are patterns in the way that people are behaving that could be good to know about if you're going to design a fund. So we're just researchers. We are not the ones who are making the final decision on what this water fund will look like. But we have a responsibility and opportunity to provide recommendations based on our understanding of what's happening in this area and what these farmers are telling us in these interviews. So together with Karin, who is a design master's student from Konstfack in Stockholm, we have some ideas for visualizations and prototyping and sort of alternative ways of asking questions in people's homes in interviews that we're hoping will give us some good results next week. And then after that short time of fieldwork, we will analyze what we've found. And I have another colleague coming here in June who will do more of a quantitative behavioral experiment, like a behavioral game, to try to verify some of the things that we're finding. Because I think we can all agree that 5 days of qualitative research in a very large area is not sufficient to make policy recommendations. So we have a phase 2 in June. So this is just the very first scoping phase. So I would be really interested in hearing any feedback, critique, thoughts, comments, experiences, similar activities that you have going on. I'd like Karin to say a couple of words and at least introduce herself first, but if you can stick around and ask questions after, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. So I'm a design student from Konstfack in Stockholm, and I started this project. I've been working in a few years about what design could be within research, and this was in a school project, an exploration in how design can be an instrument of change. So I have this collaboration with SEI to really see what is design in this project. So my areas that I'm looking into are, of course, the design methodology that Fiona talked about, but also the importance of visualization during the process. that what could that mean to innovation and to create a higher level of understanding. So that is something that I've been working on, but I'm a student just as you, so I'm a lot of here to learn, and I'm also like in a new country, so I'm looking for your thoughts about the project. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so I have a couple of questions that I'm going to make to you. The first one is that you mentioned in the beginning about the 8 centers that you have, like around the world. So this is those 8 centers that you talk about in the beginning, specializing in different areas.
Yeah, yes and no. There are some centers that have a very strong focus on one topic area. For example, our US center does a lot of work on water and climate change. The center here in Colombia also does quite a lot on water. In Africa, it's a lot on agriculture and energy. So questions that are very relevant for those countries or regions tend to have a big research focus. But it's generally quite mixed. Yeah.
So now I have another one, is which levels are the most important to do an intervention process? Like you were mentioning the behavior, the sanitary things, the healthy people, yeah, you know what I mean. Like,
What was which levels?
Yeah.
At which level it's most important to change behavior? That's a really good question. Yeah, our focus has been on the individual, so the one who's at the receiving end of the intervention. So if it's cook stoves, that's usually the cook. It's usually the woman in the household that we've been focusing on. But that's a brilliant question, because it's not just one person's behavior that needs to change. It's a lot of people. And that's why we think design and service design is a really good approach for understanding this complexity, because behavioral scientists, they tend to try and isolate one behavioral driver in one person at one point in time. But in an intervention like cook stoves or water funds or sanitation, it's many things happening with and to many people over time. So finding one thing is a bit pointless, not super useful if you're trying to understand the big change.
So how do you create a solution for that?
Like,
yeah, for I don't know how to say that. Like when you have to intervene an area in general, how do you do that? To analyze those minimum factors. I don't know. How do you do that?
I think we're always trying to widen out the scope and try to see everyone who's connected to this, who could be connected to this intervention from the very beginning, and see what role do they have in this process and how do you have them involved in it. So if it's a cook stove, for example, it's never just the stove. Like somebody is selling the fuel, someone is using the stove, someone is repairing the stove. There's a lot of services around the cook stove. So I think by including everyone early on and clearly mapping where they fit in the system and making sure everyone sees that together, like everyone is on the same page, including especially the ones funding the project and driving the project or making the technology, then they start to get this insight about, okay, maybe we need to rethink the design. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I have one more. Sorry. I have one more, but just this is related from the water funds. How does it work with the whole? I mean, this whole idea related with the Colombian government.
How does it work with the Colombian government? Do you mean what role they have in this project?
Is yours with the Colombian government?
What's our? We, as the research team, we do not have any direct contact with the Colombian government. Our center, SEI in Bogota, has good relationships with different ministries, and they work with water utilities in these payment for ecosystem services kinds of projects. But I don't think we are not at the stage where we are engaging with any government agency yet. And since this particular water fund that we're looking at, it's not public funded, it's not a government funded thing, and it's not really a private funded thing either. It's somewhere in between. It's like an NGO that's trying to do something differently. I think, though, what comes out of this case study could be very valuable for the government. And then if we think we have something useful to recommend, then we would engage with, I don't know who, but my colleagues know better than me here in Bogota who we would present that information to. Does that answer your?
Just curiosity.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this great presentation. So I present myself. I'm Luis Beltran. I'm assistant professor here at La Tadeo. I work at Páramo Ecosystem, the main watershed from Colombia, the main provider of water. So it's a high mountain ecosystem. So I'm here with some of my students that we all in our group are interested in how to transfer scientific knowledge to non-scientific people. So that's a great thing to have bring us today. So we have some questions here. So the first of them are, how do you ensure that the intervention you have done in these communities will be effective along the time? So mainly this is the first one, how to ensure that the technology is part of and improve the life condition of people. So also we have the question of how these interventions are affecting the relationship between households and political or societal or government policymakers. So how these interventions have changed the relationship between different scales in the social network. I think that's some of our questions so far.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah. The first question is an excellent one, I think, the long-term sustainability. And I think, as I understand it, there are 7 water funds in Colombia. This is what I have been told, that have been running for some time. I think TNC has some of them going, but very little evaluation on the effect. And the only long-term evaluation has been on the land conservation side, like very little on the social impact side. So first of all, just to make very clear, we are not the ones who will be designing and implementing the fund. So we will not be, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we will not be responsible for that part and for the long-term sustainability. My gut feeling is that if you were to truly design them in the way that we are sort of suggesting might be useful, that it would go a long way to ensuring the long-term sustainability, that you increase the chances of it being embraced by the community and useful in a long-term sense. That doesn't mean that you don't need to follow up on it. I think if it's, and it all depends on what the final design ends up being, but I'm already thinking that if you were to design the water fund in such a way, if you're triggering some sort of cognitive behavioral pathway, that you might want to build in some sort of reminder system or follow-up system that's a part of the water fund. So is there a way to do the 2 things at the same time? So there's automatic reminders, or there's some sort of triggered incentive for the farmers that's just part of the package, that just sort of self-reinforces over time. I think there have to be smart ways of doing that. But there's definitely a big gap in terms of looking at the long-term effects. Yeah. And the second question was about how, if I understand you, how a water fund could affect the relationship between households, communities, and government agencies. Yeah. I'm not sure. I've been asking people since I've been here and before I arrived about this. What people tend to say, Alfredo, you said this as well this morning, that a lot of people, a lot of small farmers in this area are likely to associate a water fund with private sector and privatization, and that's very negative. And there's a sort of a sense that communities expect the government to take care of a lot of things. So, I mean, there is a risk that it could shift that relationship between the households and communities. But it doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing, maybe. And I'm very ignorant, so I could be saying completely the wrong thing here, but it could provide an opportunity for a local governance or local ownership that could somehow come and fill a space between the communities and the governments, not excluding anyone, but just taking some power and ownership back to the households and the communities. And that doesn't need to be a negative thing, perhaps. But I think it's something, again, it's a factor to consider from the very beginning, that you're entering into a very complex system involving actors at different levels. And the design of a fund like this will have consequences for these actors and the relationships with each other. So,
yeah, do you work simultaneously with different actors, communities and policymakers at the same time, or your group is only focused on communities?
This is how we typically work, but this time around, I'm not sure if it's going to be possible to do it simultaneously. In previous cases, what we try to do is engage a lot with the communities and households, and then either just on our own or together with them, we present insights to other actors and try to get their feedback and have a discussion around that. And then what we learn from that, we take back to the communities. We don't have time, I think, to do it this time around. This is just a very sort of scoping study version of things that we've done in the past. But ideally, that's the model that we would follow for exactly the reason that you point out. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction of what you've been doing and what you're going to do here. I just want to make a comment that kind of connects to the second question that Maria Fernanda made, and also to the first question that he made. You said, fortunately or unfortunately, you're not the one implementing the project, but you're just making maybe some observations or suggestions or advice. But I think that in a way, the way that you do this first scoping, mapping, can determine a lot of things in the long run. And I think that's a really nice position that you have. I mean, you have a privileged position of like coming at the beginning, doing some kind of mapping that could determine a lot of the project, as I see it, like how a long, immediate, short-term intervention that could be more a research intervention can assure like a certain direction for the project. And in that sense, I think it would be very interesting if you could not only, because I think the exercise with the archetypes in Uganda was very interesting, but it was still, at least how I understood it, it was still you building archetypes of them, in a way.
Yeah.
No? Trying to characterize the people or the communities that are there. In these kind of interventions that are trying to map out certain scenarios or certain situations that are going on in a territory, especially in Latin America, well, actually everywhere around the world, but I guess in the global south is still more present. It would be interesting to try to map out what are the kind of practices that are done by communities traditionally to manage and administer common resources, for instance. And there I'm using a word, common resources, no? The word speaking maybe about the commons, and it was maybe linked to what you were saying of how to avoid that dichotomy between if it's the state taking care of everything or is privatized, then it's seen as kind of completely capitalist, but if it's seen as common resources, that it can be administered by a local self-managed organization. And there is experiences, I think, in the communities by doing it themselves. So it could be interesting to include into, I mean, as you said, maybe it would be interesting to hear some insights or ideas how you could approach to map out also these different ways in which the common resources are managed already, which have to do actually with also a tradition of participatory design of Scandinavia and in Sweden, very, very strong as well. That could pass also through something that is called also in participatory design tradition as capacity building, that is starting from what are the capacities, skills, talents, possibilities, potentialities, not necessarily the problematics, but more what are the potentialities of a certain context. So these are things that you could like include in this kind of mapping that could also connect or give also a direction to these eventual interventions, even if it's not you that. I mean, I think it's very interesting that thing that you said, that we're privileged or not to not being the ones who implement it. But I think you still have a lot of power in how you do this first approach, and that could determine a lot of things of how the further interventions are undertaken.
Yeah. Definitely. There was a lot of things there. I think we have made efforts in previous projects to try to unearth or identify those kinds of existing capabilities and capacities in a community that could be applied in a completely different, for a completely different reason, but could have a place in a system like this or in a water fund like this. So yeah, really good that you emphasized that again, because we're kind of making our interview guide now, basically, what are the key categories of things to look out for? And that would definitely be, something. And I think if you can identify things that are, there's no need to bring anything new in, there's no need for a massive new capacity building, it's there already. It's just more a case of getting everybody in the same page and finding out from them how this could work and if it could work. And I think that's kind of almost a low-hanging fruit somehow. I think it's attractive for like our partner, this NGO, to have already buy-in from the community and existing identified capacity. If we can shine a torch on that for them in a useful way, then, like you say, maybe the things we recommend has a chance of being present in the final design. That would be great. Yeah. And lots of other great things you said too, but hopefully they were recorded. And just one thing to push back a little bit on the archetypes in Uganda. We did try to have that as an iterative thing as well, so that we sketched on these characters and tested them, and then we threw out a couple because they made no sense, and kept the ones that made sense and tried to refine them a little bit. So yes, we were still the architects of the archetypes, but yeah, we tried to get the buy-in.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was not meant also as a critique, because I think also in the design process there are some things that, like even the people that have the agency or a certain position, they have to take that position of saying, here is a point where we have to take the decisions. I mean, not everything has to be made open and participatory. It's just the kind of methods that are used to characterize. But it's I guess it was fine at the moment. It was the most appropriate way.
But it's a really important thing to raise, because we're kind of, for us, the archetypes has become a really useful tool for taking really complex, messy patterns in a community. And I mean, that's not useful for a policymaker. They can't design policies for each and every individual. But if you can make these archetypes sort of representative of categories of people, then it's kind of useful. But it's critically important that those are solid. So yeah, it's something we're thinking a lot about. Yeah.
Well, in the line that Paulo was saying, I think that's something that is always missed, and I can say always because I've been taking a look at this kind of reports on this research is that we always try to say, or we always try to demonstrate that design can lead the way. But I really think that design sometimes cannot. And one thing that we are trying to work on right here is how can we identify that there is a lot of things that we cannot understand. And that happens when you come from a way to understand the world, to try to engage to people has another way to understand it. And I haven't seen that kind of things on the reports. And I think that's very important in our field to start to bring that into account. I mean, when we want to show somebody else what is the how appropriate is the intervention you're going to make, that appropriateness has to deal also with what you cannot understand, what you cannot identify. Always we are trying to, I don't know, to justify what we do, and to also demonstrate somebody else that we are doing the best that we can, and that's okay. But also that the best we can do sometimes is not the appropriate. Sometimes it's better to do nothing. And I think we are very frightened to understand that. And whenever we came, we also do it here in Colombia. When we come from Bogota to work with people in the countryside, well, it's hard to us to understand that we cannot see everything. But there's a lot of things that we are not able to see it, and but we do not take a time and do not give the place on the reports and on all these places to say, for sure we're missing something, and this is what we suggest. But yeah, I think that it's something that I would like to start to see in this kind of reports, but that it's very, very weird, and I haven't seen it.
Well, I have two questions, and sorry for my English. First is, did you use the principle, the base of circular economy when you think in your designs? The basis of circular economy?
No, I understand. No, not explicitly. Not explicitly or not sort of deliberately as part of our theoretical sort of framing. But I guess we're coming at this from a livelihoods and sustainable development perspective. And circular economy has become so big in that field that it's something we do without even being conscious of it. It becomes a sort of implicit way of thinking about solutions, like how can this have other positive effects on the community or on the nature? So yes and no, not explicitly. Yeah.
And the other one is, I have so much curiosity of how did you choose the price that people pay for the other people keep the water, with the project, where we can find more information about it?
On the water fund?
Yes.
Yeah, so we're not really there yet at that stage, and I don't think we're ever going to be the ones who set the prices. We will just, following this research, we will give recommendations on the general design of this water fund, who it should be targeting, what sort of benefits, and when it comes to behavior change, what kinds of things could be included in this fund as a package to to meet that goal of preserving the water quality. So it might be that we have some kind of recommendation on maybe, I don't know, larger farmers pay proportionally more than smaller, but we would not have anything really to do with the eventual price setting, I don't think. But I can try and point you in the direction of where you might find the information. I can try and send you a link or something to the partner that we're working with, because they're the ones who will be doing that. Yeah.
Yes, because we are working in environment and economy, and this is so interesting. This mix with design and biology, science and economics, and it's so. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Well, I first of all wish to say thank you, because was your initiative to come here to talk with us. I hope this will be the beginning of a long-term conversation. I like to underline Christian intervention. I like it a lot, because this idea of, do you remember this morning what I told you about that we are trying to change the ways we design? Usually design seems like a tool that is untouched in the research. All of us speak of design as if what design was the same thing, but design as a tool is changed, and design is designing too. But this idea of learn to identify what they don't know and we can't know is very, very interesting. I was telling to Johanna that it's a helpful role in the conversation to say we need to close the conversation for now, because we are running out of time, because you have a date soon, and we like to interview with a couple of pictures. But my interventions has as goal to perhaps asking about of this short contact of today. What do you think that we can do together in the long term? What kind of project? Because you expressed to a common friend, to Martin, this idea of come to here, because we are working with autonomia and a lot of things to expect to learn to each other. Because, for instance, the question that is in my mind after CEU's presentation is, what CEI knows about the change in your own ways, project after project. You are not the same, not just the community changing, you too. And I like very interested in that. For instance, for that reason, my question is, who's next between us? Who could be? What could be?
What's next? I would love to continue and do something with you guys. I think that would be excellent. Together with Martin in Consvac as well, we could perhaps think of something, either building on this water fund project, because it's such a tiny case study, and I think the recommendations of this could just be seen as the first step in something much deeper and longer term, because I don't think enough long-term, longitudinal research is done on this or any sort of sustainable development project. It's sort of like there's lots of fuss and excitement, something starts and then you never hear about it again, and then someone decides to check up on it 2 years later and it's not there anymore. So I'd love to do something more ethnographic, more longer term, and to see how these design methods, what effect they have on both the intervention and its uptake and effect, but also on the local community. Like what does it mean to be part of a process like this? And what effect does design have on the participants of the process at every level, from governance to individual human behavior, and on the environment itself, and all the creatures living in the environment, if you take the wider perspective. So I see huge scope for building on this or something similar.
I think here in Latadeo we have a lot of people working together, particularly Joanna at the stages from the design school here, and my research group are working on this project I mentioned at the beginning. So we are using design thinking and other design methodologies to get closer to the communities and trying to identify how the university as a universe can help to improve the life quality in the climate change context. I am a specialist in climate change, so I'm working with the biology part of the climate change here in Colombian mountains, but also my group is interested in working in transdisciplinary scope for improving the quality of life of many people in rural areas and how they are mitigating or adapting themselves to climate change. So I think it's a good thing to do. We also have engineering programs here in environmental biology. We have a set of many academic tools and academic knowledge for a big group for having great impact and push our projects towards the same direction. I think so.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. In particular, the interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary
exactly.
aspect. Yeah.
We are working on this.
Yeah, yeah.
That sounds
So I would
great.
love to get your contact
For
details
sure.
before I leave.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, we'll think of something. I don't know. Watch the space. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.